Welcome out to our Tech Talk. My name is Jared Stone.
And I'm Corey Willis.
And if you are joining us for the first time, or maybe the fifth time, we want to thank you for coming out, taking time out of your extremely busy day to come and learn more about Jitterbit. I think Corey coined the phrase where we talk tech. So we're really excited to have each and every one of you join us today. Lots of cool stuff coming down the pipe, with the end of the year coming up on our end. And I guess the first thing that we can talk some about really quickly, like we do at the beginning of each Tech Talk, is a product highlight. So one of the things, Corey, that's coming up very, very soon, I believe it's going to be December 6th for the folks in EMEA and December 10th for those in the US, is API Proxy. So what's the deal with API Proxy?
Yeah, so that's going to be, I believe, part of our 9.6 release. 9.6 coming out there in really just a few days at this point. But API Proxy, so a lot of you are out there, you're using APIs. We've done Tech Talks on APIs. And we've mentioned before here on the Tech Talk series about how you could go in and actually connect to an existing API within the Jitterbit Studio and then expose that through the Jitterbit API management portal, bring in documentation, different things like that. And yes, it's possible, but this new API proxy feature, it's really cool because now you're going to be able to not have to leverage the studio for this. So say you have a set of existing APIs, you've started using Jitterbit for API management for your new APIs, but you want to consume your existing APIs. So now you just go into the management console, into the API manager, you'll be able to just put in that URL, have all of the metrics that you have with all of the other Jitterbit APIs, a lot of other things, security controls, things like that. And it'll just proxy that API for you, and you're able to bring all of that management into a single platform. So it's a really cool little feature that's coming out. I know it's not going to apply to everybody, but just want to give you a quick glimpse of what that is and what's coming out there.
Of course. So great little implementations coming out in regards to management, security, and the governance of those APIs. So for those that may be new to the program, to the Tech Talk, what we do typically now is we're going to get on into our topic for today. Okay, so Corey, what are we exactly going to be diving into in today's Tech Talk?
Yeah, so today what we've got for you is a discussion on some newer features and some features that a lot of people don't necessarily gravitate towards by default that we just want to let you know about. So this is more of a tips and tricks. I know a lot of our Tech Talks, we talk about best practices. And this one, it's going to be a little bit more tips and tricks. We'll talk about some best practices as far as using these. But our primary focus is going to be a topic that we call global variable versus temp. So a lot of us, we get into multi-operation workflows where we're doing something that's more than a single operation and we need to move data between them. And these are two different strategies we can use to accomplish that. And that's what we want to talk about.
Perfect. So I guess what we can do is let's jump right in and say maybe when we should use these type of items here. Maybe.
Yeah, and I think what's great to do this is let's go ahead and move over into my studio design. So we'll get my screen out there for you guys. Here you go. And so this will give us some context of what I'm talking about. So I built this out. This is a NetSuite to Salesforce type of operation. This is using success operation flows, which in our last Tech Talk, we mentioned about how this is one strategy that a lot of people use. There's another that we use controller scripts. I'll show you that in a minute as well, don't worry. But I wanted to set the stage with it right here. So if you take a look, in this first operation, the NS search customer canonical flow, this is pulling customer data out of NetSuite. Okay, now the context that we're using here of NetSuite and Salesforce, that doesn't matter. This is a design technique, a design methodology that you can use no matter what your endpoints are. Okay, we're just using these as an example. But let's open up this transformation. And I did this real simple. I just created a super simple canonical model. Really, it's not a true canonical model, but it gives you an idea of what you might use. Where we're taking the data out of NetSuite, we're mapping it into this little text structure that we're going to use to move it to another operation. But where do we put that so the next operation can grab it? Well, I set it up with temp storage. I've seen people use things like SFTP if they don't have access, if they're using our cloud agents or something. Maybe they use SFTP so they can get to that data. During design time, this can actually be quite useful for something along these lines, is to put that data somewhere that you can access it. So in this case, we're using temp It's, if we're running a private agent, this would be very accessible because we could access that on the direct file system. If we're using a cloud agent, it's not quite as accessible, but it does achieve the primary purpose of then allowing us to pick it up in the next operation. And you see now temp as our source. And if we open up that secondary transformation, we now see that little canonical model on the left-hand side as our source structure mapping in now into a Salesforce account. So this one's NetSuite customers, Salesforce accounts. Again, that doesn't matter. It's that we're pulling data from somewhere. We have to use that in a future operation. Now, this is using temp storage. The alternative here that's a newer feature to the platform that some of you may not be aware of, that can be very useful in certain circumstances, is to not use temp, but instead use a global variable. So I'm going to clear these two out. And here on my target, I already have one set up, GV, global variable, and this is just temp data. Not much to it. You have the option to append, just different things in here, but it's just a global variable. And then you could use that again in the following source. So an alternative method, it accomplishes the same thing. But there are some specific scenarios where you may want to choose one over the other. And this is some confusion that I've heard over the last couple months, is when should we use global variable as source and target? When should we use temp? Is there a preference of one or the other? Mm-hmm. You've heard some of that too, I'm sure, Jared.
Yeah.
And so let's talk through that. Global variables. When are these the most useful? Well, I'll say, first of all, global variables are going to be more useful to you with data that's more transactional in nature. Mm-hmm. Our transactional data sets tend to be very small, and we tend to have to use those in a much more agile fashion. So we may have to, say, do the first operation and grab that to a global variable, but then a few operations down, we use it in a script somewhere.
Sure.
And so then accessing that data, if it's on temp, yeah, you can use functions and you can say, let's read file and do things like that. But it's just a touch more complex. It's just a lot easier just to throw a global variable in. Global variables, though, you have to remember these are memory resident. So this makes the most sense for very small data sets. So we're talking, a couple K of data. I think technically we recommend if it's like 7K or less, that this could make good sense. So it simplifies the design time, it simplifies accessing that data, but it does have a recommendation of very, very small data sets. So again, if you're accessing in from an API maybe, mm-hmm. that could be a use case. If you're pulling a single record based on a real-time trigger, these very small transactional data sets. And let's be honest, we all tend to have a lot of those out there at various times in our processes, right?
Sure, yeah.
Now, let's switch the spectrum across. What if we're talking large data sets, right? Something that's going to be a batch process. Global variables probably not your best choice there. Mm-hmm. So you've got to look at that. And when you're doing your design time, you sit there and say, okay, well, is this more of a batch process? Am I dealing with larger data sets? And I hate even using that term because we're really talking, tiny data sets mm-hmm. with global variables versus, normal to large. A lot of times we think big data, we think gigabytes of data.
Sure.
Absolutely. You don't want to throw that in memory residency. You want to put that in temp storage in that scenario. But so there's the basics of it. When to use temp? You want to use temp with your larger data sets. You want to use you might want to use global variable for your really small data sets.
Sure.
So let's show real quick kind of a scenario where global variable could be a nice little benefit too. Because there's another topic we have, right?
Yeah, so the next topic that we want to jump right into would be the logging and the debugging feature.
Yeah. So with logging and debugging, that's always something that comes up. And I mentioned when we started about the SFTP scenario, that we have people that during design time, don't recommend it during production time necessarily, mm-hmm. but during a design time, they might use something like an SFTP server as their temp storage. And that enables them to access that data. Again, if you're running a private agent, you can access the temp data directly. But let me show you a little trick. Okay, so here we have this first operation, and we're writing this to a global variable now. I could also come in here and say, let's insert after this a script. Now, I went ahead and created a script for us for the sake of time because we try to keep our content down to about 20 minutes and open up for Q&A. We haven't really mentioned that yet.
Yeah, no, that was actually something that I was thinking about. For those, maybe a first timer on, we do Q&A at the very end, and we allow at least 15 minutes, but we're going to stay as long as you need us. So that will come at the end. So if you have a question that's brewing, feel free to go ahead and put that into the chat feature of Zoom, or you can wait to the very end, whichever you would choose. But that will happen once we cover our content in the next few months here.
Yeah. This Tech Talk series, this is for you. So if you have questions, even if it's not directly related, we'll do our best to answer them. Sometimes it's outside of our areas of expertise, but we'll make sure we get you an answer. Okay, so this is all about connecting with you and letting you know some of this stuff, but ultimately to be here to answer your questions as well. So here we go. I've got this script. I created it ahead of time. There it is, a logging script. Now let me show you what this is doing. Now remember, we're writing to a global variable. What we can do here in this script is a very simple little exercise and just simply say write to operation log and our global variable. Now, when you think about it from a debugging and logging aspect, sometimes you don't want to log your production data necessarily, but during debugging, you may want to do that. And so particularly, again, if you're dealing with that small transactional data, this is a prime opportunity where you can simply write that to a global variable target within your process flow, and then just simply place a script immediately after that's going to write that to your op logs. So when you're going back and debugging, you don't have to worry about going out to the temp storage. You don't have to worry about going out to an SFTP server somewhere. You just go to your op log and it's there. Again, micro data sets, those little mini tiny data sets, that's where this makes the most sense, but we encounter those quite often. So, obviously, you could do this, and if you kind of looked ahead a little bit, you see I have another scenario here. You can do this with temp data as well. It's just slightly more complex, where you have to add in a read file function. The other thing you have to consider is that file written at that point in time? You may want to do a flush file, some different things like that. So the complexity is a little bit deeper when you're dealing with doing this from the temp scenario versus global variable. Now, for those of you that are saying, hey, this is really cool, I want to look into it a little bit more, we have an article out here on Success Central. I went ahead and pulled it up for you. Global variable versus temp storage. You can go look into all of the details on this, all of the little nuances. Success Central, just search global variable versus temp storage. You're going to find it. It's right there, okay? So there's some of that, but we've got a few other little things that we want to touch on as well.
Exactly. No, and that's some great information in regards to the differences between temp and global and some things on debugging. But we want to move now into use previous operation options here.
Yeah, and so this is something that we sometimes we refer to it as pass through. And so let me just show you, because here we're leveraging what we call the canonical model, okay, where we're going to a data structure and then we're picking up that data structure again. There's another method we can do with this. And so let me just move this over to, we can actually just do it right here as well. We'll just stay on this same one. So in this, we're taking the first operation. We're writing it to a global variable. Doesn't matter whether it's global variable or temp, the same methodology. We have to pick up this same data in the immediately following operation. Now, this doesn't apply if you need to pick it up, say, 4 operations down your chain. Okay, this isn't going to work in that scenario. But this is very common, where we have to pick it up in the immediately following operation in a success operation call. In those scenarios, let me show you a trick. You can actually come up here. We could remove the target completely from the first operation. Or just remove it from the graph. Let's remove the logging. Now we just have the NetSuite search into a transformation. In the subsequent operation, we now take the source and we right-click and we just simply say use source from previous operation, and it creates a flow just like that. Pros and cons, right? We always want to look at pros and cons. Performance. This is about the best performance that you can get. So if you have something where Performance is a key metric for your process. You may want to look at this. Debugging, it's a little more challenging, okay, because we don't have that source, that target on the first operation to log. Okay, so you would have to do any logging within the transformation itself. Personally, if I'm going to use this design methodology, during design time, I'll use temp or temp SFTP or global variable writing at the op log, something along those lines. And then when I move to production, I'll strike that back out and go to this methodology. But if you're sitting there saying, you know, I don't want to write to temp, I don't want to put this in global variables, I just want to move it to the operation and use it, this is a nice little tip and trick that you can use. So just some different approaches. Like I said, this isn't necessarily a best practices thing. This is more of a tips and tricks, just showing you some of the different tools you can have in your tool belt to go out there and build these integration processes. Now, again, this is only workable when you have an immediately following success operation. That's the only time you can use this. If you need to use the process, say 3, 4, 5 operations down your chain, then you're going to be either temp storage or global variable.
Perfect. Perfect. No, lots of great information there, Corey. So I guess the next thing we could talk about here, kind of for everyone out there, steps going forward, correct? So Mike, if you would you throw up on screen, we have a lower third that you can throw up in regards to Success Central. There we go. Perfect. So Corey mentioned this just a little bit earlier, but this is a great place, Success Central, to go to, not only gain information on today's topic, but anything Jitterbit related, that you can go out here and check out Success Central, view that information, and, learn a lot of great stuff there. The next thing we have is Jitterbit University. So maybe today, you've learned a little bit, you want to learn a little more. Well, that's a great place to go to next. So what you would want to do is reach out to your customer representative or your partner representative, whoever that may be, to get an enrollment key to enroll in Jitterbit University. We do have some exciting stuff coming down the pike here very soon in regards to that. So stay tuned. We'll definitely get that information out to you when it's ready. But then finally, the last thing is the Jitterbit Community. So a great place to go to, you as a customer, to go and give your input, your ideas to us, so we can make the product better, because that's really what it's all about. It's through the ideas portal. So all you have to do is just go out to, I believe it is community.jitterbit.com, and log in and give us your idea.
Yeah, so that ideas portal, great place to go. If you've got a product feature request, things like that, put it out there. See what else is out there. Vote on them. They do go by votes.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that's important to if you want to see that the product continue to improve. I mean, obviously we're doing what we think is good, but we want to do what you think is good too. So go out there, take a look through the ideas, and vote them up, vote them down. Let us know. Very cool.
So I guess what we can do now is jump right into a Q&A session. So if you do have questions, this is a great time for you to submit those questions. And like Corey said, if it's pertaining to this topic, or maybe if it's something outside of this topic specifically, if we have the answer, we'll help you right now. If we don't, we'll definitely try to loop back around, whether it's offline or whatnot. So definitely feel free to send those over.
So absolutely, we can jump right back into the studio, and I want to go ahead and go through, let's see here. So here's one that came through for pass-through. And so I'll go ahead, we've kind of got that set up here right now. Does this have to be the next successful operation, or could you use run operation? That's a great question. I don't think you can use run operation. I would have to actually test that and verify. So let's talk about that. And what would we do in that scenario? And I told you I would show you. I neglected to. I apologize. But we'll show you right now. If we used a controller, and so this is kind of what you're talking about. If we use the run operation scenario, could we use the strategy of use source from previous operation? What we may do, we may just actually test it live here in a moment. We'll see what else comes through. But this is one of those scenarios where you do want to pay attention to your methodologies. I have this one set up as temp. Let me show you the script. This is the little controller. This is kind of what we talked about in the last Tech Talk, where I'm just using run operation. Now, one of the caveats here that we mentioned about the variable usage and the size, that you really want to pay attention to. is when you're using this true versus false. Okay, it's a little, it's really minor, and so overall, I just have an overreaching thing that, hey, if it's a small data set, you can use global variable. But you want to make sure that that's a small data set, because there can be little things in some of the way that the back end works and whatnot when you're running asynchronous. Just some other little nuances to it. Just keep those data sets small, you're safe, okay? But in this scenario, what we've got set up is to read from Temp. I told you, we'll just test it live. We'll see, we'll answer the question. Not afraid to do that here. I'm gonna say use source from previous operation. And there we go, let's see. Well, we'll just save that first. There we go. Okay, so we've got that set. That operation is used in other processes, so that would affect it there. Always something you want to be cautious of in a production scenario. We're in a strict demo, not a problem. I'm going to go ahead and remove this right here. Yeah, there we go. There, we got that removed. So there's our process. So let's deploy this. And we'll just run it, and we'll kind of see what happens here. Like I said, I think, and we may prove myself wrong right here, okay? But I think that this does require using the success operation. That is that's what's predicated there. But like I said, we're going to run it. We're going to see what happens here. In the meantime, while this is running, because we do have a larger data set, this may take it just a few moments to go through. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see. How do we give the custom name for a hosted API in Harmony if you don't want to use the jitterbit.net in the name? Great question. What you want to do is reach out to your CSM and talk to them about a private API gateway. Private API gateway. That's what you want to do. And I'll tell you what, Jared, if you could go ahead and type that in as well, so that way they have that terminology. Private API gateway. We'll probably do a future tech talk on that as well. But that's what you want to look into there. Let's see here. Hosted HTTP endpoint is another question that came across here about security in that. And I'm going to go by the strict terminology that you're using here. Feel free to bring in a follow-up question on this. There is a feature in Jitterbit called Hosted HTTP Endpoint. It is an older feature. It's not using the API platform. And security with that is quite minimal. It is an old feature set that we have not deprecated because we don't want to break old processes that are out there. It's not something we recommend using going forward. And so, yes, you're right. It does not have nearly the options as far as security around it. It is intended for internal consumption at this point, and that's the only recommended use case that we put out there on that. Okay, so there's a little bit on that. So great question. Specifics here. You mentioned using only small data sets as a global variable. What would be the largest data set you'd feel safe putting as a global variable? I would not exceed 7K. And like I said, small. Now, for transactional data, that's acceptable for the vast majority of scenarios. You get an API call in, it's typically going to be nowhere near 7K. Okay, so that one is a scenario that we definitely want to look at. But that would be what I would say. If it's smaller than 7K, you're safe. If you're over that, sometimes you're not going to have an issue. Okay, so it's not like once you reach that threshold, it's going to completely kill it or anything. But there is some little, some unintended things that may happen at times if you have larger data sets. Mm-hmm. And if you're curious about that in specifics, we could talk to you offline about that. Okay, so let's see here. What is more efficient, creating several dictionaries to use during transformation processes, or to load all the data values into a single dictionary and then use arrays to split the dictionary values to read the data values needed at the time of transformation? So we're getting into a lot of specifics in this particular question. And again, I'm going to go back to the specific terminologies that we're using. There is a feature set within Jitterbit that we call dictionaries. Dictionaries allow you to load a set of key value pairs. And a lot of this is really going to depend on your scenario. I'd love to actually hear a little bit more about what you're trying to do there. It sounds like you've got a kind of a multi-dimensional scenario going on here. But and efficiency, oh my gosh, efficiency is one of those things where there is so much out there of it depends that I hate answering this live. But I'm going to try my best, okay? We may want to do a follow-up and actually get you on a call with somebody to look at your particular process since we are talking efficiency here. But dictionaries, if you're putting in array values into the dictionary and then trying to split that back out, that can get a little tricky at times. It's more of a design time trickiness than it is a process. But let's see. I'm just kind of reading the question again here, make sure I get this right. Single dictionary and then use arrays. Personally, if I were in that scenario, I would probably use multiple dictionaries is what I would do. Again, as far as efficiency, I don't want to actually go run the test and see what's better. But for simplicity's sake, I would probably run multiple dictionaries rather than trying to kind of do an array within a dictionary and then split it back out. To me, that just would bring in additional complexity that I wouldn't want to have if somebody were to pick up the project after me. I would go with multiple dictionaries. Again, for efficiency, I'd love to hop on a call with you or get somebody on a call with you and look at your particular process and kind of look at that. So another mention came across, another question in regards to the global variable versus temp and the question of what is more thread safe. Great question, okay? This is actually a really great scenario that I forgot to bring in here. And again, I apologize, but that's why we've got Q&A, right?
Sure.
So, thread safe, what are we talking about? Let's say you have multiple processes that are using the same temp target, same temp source. Okay, so for instance, what I set up here, if we go back and take a look, I've just got this sitting out here, temp storage, and it's just called temp. Now, in this scenario, it is a file on the file system. It is temporary. It will be cleaned up, but it is a file on the file system. If that's running, and let's say there's a longer running process, let's say we have a chain of 5 operations, and in operation 1, we write the temp, and we need to pull it back in operation 5. But operation 3 hangs for a while. During that run of operation 3, where it's kind of hanging, you have a secondary process kickoff. That secondary process also uses the temp storage with the same file name. Hey, now we have a potential conflict, right? Again, I so apologize I neglected to bring this in earlier. I'm grateful for the question because this could cause a problem. You have this secondary process run off, it writes to temp, but it overwrites your original file. You go back to the first process now, it catches up, gets to operation 5, it pulls temp, now you've got a different data set than what is intended. Global variables. If you use that, it's going to stay isolated to that specific process thread. Okay, so you're never going to run into that issue. Again, the only issue you really have with global variables is the size limitation. So what about those scenarios where we do have larger sizes, but we need to keep it thread safe? In your controller script, and let's go back to that one, it may have finished by now, I don't know. It's still out there running. This may sit there and run forever, who knows? Sure. But in the controller script, we could identify a unique identifier. We could come in here and say something like global variable GUID, and I'm just keeping this super simple just for the sake of things, and we could assign a GUID. Now we have a global unique identifier, a unique value on a global variable, and then what we could do is if we put back in this a target. Again, we're talking larger data set where it doesn't make sense to use global variable. We put in temp, and what we do is we might come in here and say temp, and a lot of you may not realize you can do this. You put in a square bracket, and now you can access all of your global variables, and I'll access that GUID global variable that I just created. And then I can use that throughout, essentially turning the temp storage into something that is much, much more thread safe. You could also put it in the path if you wanted to do that. We could put the GUID up here, and now we have a specific path and use the file name. So if you want to make it thread safe, obviously we want to make things thread safe, right? This is something you want to consider. You should, when using temp storage, always make sure you have a unique name, the variable usage here is a great way to do that. Okay, so that's still running again. This may not run in time for us to get through all of this. So let's see here. Just going back through the questions and make sure that we've gotten everything. There's one that just came in here. How can I tell how large a global variable was? Is there a way to check? It's a good question. Just trying to think. And again, like I said, we may not always have the answers, but I'm going to do my best. Just going offhand, what I would do without doing additional research, what I would gravitate towards is write that to a temp, and then you should be able to pull some metrics off of that. You know what? Let's mark that one as a follow-up, Jared, if you would, because I want to make sure that we check all of that out and make sure that that's such a technical question. I want to make sure we get a proper answer. I don't want to just go kind of shooting from the hip on this one. Okay, so we'll follow up on that one. We'll get you a good answer on that. Let's see. Another one here asked me to talk about using temp storage when using clustered agents. Another great one, okay, because temp storage is local to the agent. So if you're running private agents and you have an agent group, or if you're running in the cloud, that temp storage may not be accessible for a subsequent runtime. Number one, we have auto cleanup rules. So there's a certain duration that may sit out there in temp, and then it's going to get cleaned up. If you are using it within a process thread, then that's safe. And I say safe as in it's not going to disappear on you. If, however, you're triggering another operation, okay, so we're running things, and I hate to use this term, but I don't know a better term for it, but if we're running things asynchronously, in that, hey, we've ran an operation, we put it out into a temporary storage location, and we have another operation that maybe it kicks off based on a trigger or based on something else that happens at a different period in time. It's a separate process thread. It may not hit the same agent group. Okay, it's going to be the same way for global variables in this scenario, because those global variables, they're not going to persist to another runtime. So it is something you have to keep in mind. If you need to persist data between runtimes, temp storage is not your ideal scenario. Neither is global variable. That's where you do want to use a data store that you control, whether that's something like an SFTP server or a database, something that you control. It doesn't really matter what it is, that you know is going to persist from runtime to runtime. So hopefully that answers that question there for you.
One thing really quickly in regards to the question on, how can I tell how large the global variable is and not exceed the 7K? If you would, that came in anonymously. So if you would, in the chat, just reach out to us so we can reach out to you directly. So maybe an email or something there would be great so we can get back in touch with you. Okay.
Let's see. Can you manually append data to a global variable target in a transformation like you can a file target? I'm trying to think. So I'm assuming here we're talking within, say, like a script. You've got stuff in a global variable. Or I'll just talk through some different scenarios. We'll put it that way. Okay. So let's go back over into our script here of our long-running operation. And let's say we have a global variable. It's as simple as saying global variable equals, global variable plus whatever. You can just simply concatenation. That's going to do that here. Now, if we go back like we do with files at times, and we look at it in this scenario where we have a global variable here, we also have an option to append to data. So kind of both scenarios there that we can address, where you can either append in script or you can append through the global variable target. So I hope that answers the question. Feel free at any time, guys, if we don't answer the question in the spirit of what you're looking for, ask follow-ups, please, okay? We're here to answer your questions best we can, and but hopefully that kind of talks to that a little bit there. Can you dynamically create and promote a global variable within the operation? I may ask for a little follow-up on that, but I'm going to answer it to what I think you may be asking. Global variables do not have to be defined prior to use in Jitterbit. So I know some languages out there, you have to declare a variable and what type it is and all the type of stuff. Not so with Jitterbit. You want to use a global variable, say it's in a script, $ global variable name equals whatever, you're good to go. Okay. Now, if we're doing it as a target like we have right here, obviously those have to be created. Now, again, this could be this variable name could also be a variable. So you can get really creative in that and kind of what you want that to be. But yes, everything in Jitterbit is dynamic as far as assigning those. You do not have to explicitly declare variables anywhere or assign a data type. All of that is dynamic. So I hope that answers your question. I think that's kind of what you were asking. Again, feel free with follow-ups there. So let's see. Anything else? Just kind of making sure we've got everything answered. Again, we're here as long as you have questions. It looks like we've got our queue clear for the moment. So what I want to do, I want to take it and kind of give a little bonus material here. Okay. So we've talked about this as use previous operation as source and kind of passing data through. There's another strategy that I'll throw out there. Okay. We weren't sure if we were going to get to this just because of time, but again, since we don't have the questions right now, we'll go into it and maybe it'll spawn a few things. I want to go through another scenario here, a success operation. Okay, just like we've done before. Right now it's using temp to temp, but in this scenario, I want to show you a way, and I get asked this occasionally, when I show kind of that canonical model of, hey, we're going to pull from one system, go to a temporary data structure, and then we have another operation to pull from it. I get the question from time to time, do I have to do that? I mean, I like it. It helps me a lot when I'm designing because it gives me a way that I can kind of have this stop point and debug things when necessary. So I really like that. Some people, they want to keep the transformations as straightforward as possible, right? Mm-hmm. So here's a methodology. We've got it on screen still. So in this scenario, we come out of NetSuite and we have a transformation that goes to the canonical model. We want to eliminate that. What we want to do is be able to map our data directly from the NetSuite model to the Salesforce model. Again, endpoints don't matter, but we want to go directly from one system to another with our mappings. Here's how we would do it. The simplest way is to come in here into this transformation. Now this only works with the web service calls. Okay, so the connector calls like NetSuite and Salesforce or other SOAP calls, if you're dealing with a standard transformation, this isn't going to work. You'd have to go to an archive operation to do it. But you can right-click right here and just simply say, pass through. Now, we don't have a transformation there anymore. And now what we can do is we can go to the secondary operation, and that transformation can then be direct NetSuite to Salesforce. Now, I did prep this ahead of time. This isn't just magic. You do have to actually build a transformation for it, but I'll show you how simple it is. If we were going to just clear that and rebuild it, we could say create new, source is going to be XML. You could come in here and say things like, okay, this is actually going to be a web service response, different stuff like this. But as you go through right there, see that NetSuite schemas? It's because I've already created this. And then you could say, okay, there's my customer response schema in XML, and you go through, and now we have those two data structures, and mine bombed out on me here because things are hanging too long. But that's what creates this. Let's see if it'll refresh its session or if it'll bomb out again on us. Who knows?
There you go.
There we go. But that's what will create this and enable us to do that direct mapping. Now, we can still leverage all the other features we've talked about today, right? We could still go in here and say, okay, let's change this to global variable instead. Again, bulk process like what we're kind of running right now on the back end. Not the use case to go to the global variable. If we're talking transactional, we're pulling a single account. That could be a prime use case. Okay, if it's transactional in nature, that's where we're looking at. Again, below 7K is kind of that threshold that we recommend. But we can also just say, hey, let's remove this. Let's set this to use source from previous operation. We'll just do a quick little screen refresh here if we can. There we go. And now we do our NetSuite search, and we have a single transformation For some people, you may prefer this methodology. Again, I like using the canonical models, even if they're, like I said, even if they're a simplified canonical, but something that's going to move it. It makes your operations much easier to reuse between different things, and that's always something that we should be looking at is how can we reuse it. Again, that's why we look at using the controller scripts. As you can see here, this thing's still running, so we'll have to get back with you on that there. I'm just going to go ahead and clear that out at this point and let that go. But we'll get that figured out and let you know for certain on that. Well, here we go. We're 43 minutes past the hour. Any other questions out there, guys? We slate these tech talks for 45 minutes to an hour. We open it up for Q&A. I hope you guys are enjoying this.
Sure, yeah. Remember, this is about you. It's about each and every one of you. So topics like, today's topic and every other topic we've discussed is coming from you guys. So if you have something that you want to discuss or us to discuss, definitely submit that information through your CSM. I think that's a great outlet for that, and then that information will make its way over to us, and we'll, based upon demand, I guess you would say, it may make the cut and come out eventually. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of the goal with that.
Now we've got another Tech Talk scheduled for early January, right?
Early January, so we won't talk to you until then.
Unless you reach out to us.
Unless you reach out to us, but we do hope you have a good New Year and holiday. But yeah, so that's really the way we get that information. So.
Okay. Well, no other questions out there, so we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. If you think of anything in the meantime, you can always reach us directly, training@jitterbit.com. I will say with that, if it is something that we can address, we will. Occasionally, we may forward it on over to support if it's something that needs a little bit more specificity. I butchered that, didn't I?
That's a tough word, though.
Yeah, more specifics. We may occasionally direct you over there. Yeah. But you can always reach us there. Training@jitterbit.com. If you do need direct support@jitterbit.com as well. Community, Ideas Portal, Jitterbit University, Success Central. All of these resources are out there for you. Everybody, thank you so much for coming out today.
Take care.